We had videos on all three JG9 media channels come out yesterday as part of Triple Header Thursday. Missed any of the action? Check the links in the description to watch those videos now. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want you to imagine this bizarre scenario. Imagine that CBS is airing a game for the whole country to see, and throughout the entire game, there are digital advertisements on the field. Almost like you see in basketball and hockey and rugby and tons of other sports, which fortunately has not crossed over to the NFL yet, but I don't want to give anyone any ideas. These ads are all over the field, to the point where anytime there's a shot of the field, you're seeing these ads. However, the ads that they're airing are for the all-new season of The Masked Singer, so all across the field, you see these digital ads for that show. But wait a second, I can hear you saying, isn't that a show on Fox? And this game is on CBS? Why on earth would CBS be showing advertisements on the field for a Fox program? Wouldn't that hurt them and dent their ratings and just not seem to make a whole lot of sense? Well, as ridiculous as this dilemma sounds, something like that happened during the game that you've been watching this whole time, which was a 1982 battle on the penultimate week of the season between New Orleans and Washington. This game was being broadcast by CBS, and yet, throughout the broadcast, there was another network that was part of the Big Three that was getting quite the free publicity boost because of the layout of the field, and because of how the field looked, particularly at midfield and in one of the end zones. Because this is the story behind one of the strangest controversies in the history of the Louisiana Superdome, and one of the most bizarre broadcasting controversies in the history of the National Football League on CBS. Before I talk about the controversy in question and what had everyone up in arms over there, we need some context to understand this game, as well as how the Superdome operated. It's December 26, 1982, and we have a big game at the Superdome in the NFC between New Orleans and Washington during the abbreviated 9-game strike-shortened season. Seriously, I feel like I've done 1,000 videos on this season, despite the fact that it's the shortest season in NFL history. There was just so much wacky stuff that happened that is absolutely fascinating. Anyways, to say that this game was important for both of these teams would be putting it lightly, as in many ways, this felt like a must-win for both teams for very different reasons. For Washington, they were fighting for dear life for home field advantage and for the number 1 seed in the NFC in the Super Bowl tournament. They were guaranteed a playoff spot. That was never in doubt. However, as of now, they were tied with the Dallas Cowboys for the number 1 seed in the conference with a 6-1 record. And in fact, Dallas owned the tiebreaker by beating Washington head-to-head 24-10 3 weeks before at the midway point of the season. Washington had no room for error whatsoever. If you win out, you've got a shot at getting home field and at getting to play a below 500 team in the first round of the playoffs. Lose this game, and you can pretty much kiss your home field hopes goodbye. As for New Orleans, they were fighting for dear life for a spot in the Super Bowl tournament period. This was a Saints team that had never made the playoffs before, and you would think that with an expanded field, since 16 teams now made it instead of 10, that this would be their best shot, even if it would come with a giant asterisk. However, they were 3-4 through 7 games, and they'd have a massive uphill climb to make it if they lost this one, since even though you could still get in with a 4-5 record, you're relying heavily on a bunch of tiebreakers going your way. In more ways than one, this game had massive implications on the entire season. And when all was said and done, Washington prevailed, as you can tell from the highlights that you're watching and will continue to watch of this game. It was actually a fairly convincing victory, all things considered, as Washington never trailed throughout the game, led by 2 possessions at the half, and 1 thanks to 2 touchdown catches by Charlie Brown, and thanks to a thoroughly dominant defensive performance. Washington won the game 27-10, and they outgained New Orleans 448-197 in total yardage, more than doubling that total. Washington's defensive line was dominant, as Guido Merkins got sacked 5 times. New Orleans got nothing going whatsoever through the air, as they finished the game with just 77 net passing yards, with Merkins going 9 for 24, completing 37.5% of his passes for 104 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception, and a passer rating of 34, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball to the ground on every single play. And Washington showcased a strong running game too, as between Joe Theismann, Joe Washington, Clarence Harmon, and John Riggins, the team combined for 198 yards on 5.4 yards per carry. All in all, it was a solid day at the office for a team that was looking like one of the best teams in all of football, if not the best team, as they drew one step closer to home field advantage at having the Super Bowl tournament, at least on the NFC side of the bracket, run through RFK Stadium. But while the game is nice and all, the main focus of this game, at least for the purposes of our story, is what happened on the field, or rather, what the teams were playing on. Literally, the focus is the field itself. Because you might have noticed throughout these highlights that something about this field looks incredibly wonky, and something just doesn't look right. Yes, you have an end zone painted for the Saints. There's nothing unusual about that whatsoever, as just about every team in the NFL paints their end zones for the home team. But the midfield logo is the logo of the Sugar Bowl, and the other end zone is the end zone for the Penn State Nittany Lions, who last time I checked, were not playing the New Orleans Saints in this game. I know people joke all the time about could the best college team beat the worst NFL team, and could the early 80s Penn State Nittany Lions beat the early 80s Saints. But why am I seeing a completely real, legitimate field where it's painted like that? Well, as you might have guessed, that's because of the game taking place 1 week later at the Superdome, which is this game right here between the Georgia Bulldogs and the Penn State Nittany Lions in the 1983 Sugar Bowl, which was, for all intents and purposes, the national championship game, seeing as Penn State entered ranked as the number 2 team in the country with a 10-1 record, and Georgia entered as the number 1 team with an undefeated 11-0 record. In 1 week, Penn State and Georgia would square off at the Superdome in what was, on paper, one of the biggest college football games of all time, especially since this was at a time where it wasn't common for the number 1 team and number 2 team to meet in a bowl game. Heck, just for reference, the year before, the number 1 team entering bowl season was Clemson, and they played in the Orange Bowl against the number 4 ranked team Nebraska, while the number 2 team was Georgia, and they played in the Sugar Bowl against Pitt, who was ranked number 10. So that's what was taking place at the Superdome a few days after this Washington-New Orleans game. Okay, so why is this a problem? Well, before I talk about the problem with this that had TV executives up in arms, let's address the elephant in the room. Why was half the field even painted in the first place? Why couldn't they just do it after the game? It's not like the Sugar Bowl was taking place the next day. This game was taking place on December 26th, and the Sugar Bowl was January 1st. Look at Mercedes-Benz Stadium down in Atlanta. They've got the SEC Championship game ending on a Saturday night, and a Falcons game on Sunday afternoon. And they do a complete quick change, as though the SEC Championship was never even there. So why couldn't the Superdome do that? And the answer to that question is, quite simply, they were really bad at their jobs. To illustrate this, here's a touchdown scored on December 20th, 1981, in an NFC West game between the San Francisco 49ers and New Orleans Saints. The 49ers scored a touchdown in an end zone painted for Tulane, despite the fact that this game was on December 20th, and the last Tulane home game was against LSU on November 28th. They couldn't do a complete changeover for a Saints game that took place 3.5 weeks after a Tulane game. What made you think they could possibly do a quick changeover for the Sugar Bowl? They needed all the time they could get. Heck, the sloth from Zootopia shows more urgency than this. And this posed a major problem for CBS, because the entire field was decked out for the Sugar Bowl, which would be fine if the Sugar Bowl was being broadcast on CBS. However, it was not. The Sugar Bowl was being aired on ABC, meaning that throughout the entire 3-hour broadcast, CBS was basically giving ABC free advertising by showing people the field. In essence, CBS was saying, ignore our programming on the night of New Year's, and instead, watch ABC. Now, you might not think that this is a big deal. If this was NBC, it would be a different story, since NBC was airing the Orange Bowl directly against the Sugar Bowl at the same exact time. But for CBS, they weren't airing a bowl game that night. Anything that CBS was airing that night would simply be counter-programming, and would appeal to anyone who didn't want to watch football. I looked at the TV guide for CBS that day, and found that airing directly against the Penn State-Georgia game, they were going to show the Black Stallion. Don't get me wrong, that movie got good reviews and was acclaimed. But I'm not sure how many people watching the New Orleans-Washington game were thinking to themselves, well, I can't wait to watch the Black Stallion, and wait a second, what's on the field? Oh yeah, I totally forgot. The number 1 team and the number 2 team in college football are battling for the championship. Never mind. Yes, we won't be doing that then. If you're a football fan watching this game, odds are, regardless of whether or not the Sugar Bowl logos were painted on the field and in the end zones, you would have remembered or chosen the Sugar Bowl over the Black Stallion. On the surface, this seemed like it was making a giant mountain out of a molehill. Heck, a lot of people at CBS view this as a non-issue, even joking about the whole thing. Doug Richardson, a member of CBS Sports, laughed. You're laughing. The New Orleans-Washington game is being played on a field that's directly promoting a competing network, and you're laughing. But really, this was a non-issue. As Richardson said, it looks like they're going to get a lot of publicity this weekend. If they need the help, they need the help. We can't throw a big blanket over midfield. Maybe we could sneak in there the night before and paint a big CBS eye over it. However, I promised you a controversy, and by God, you're going to get a controversy. Because not everyone at CBS was laughing. Because CBS executive producer Terry O'Neill was absolutely livid about this whole thing. He was fuming. He angrily called up Val Pinchback, the NFL broadcast director, and ranted to him about the whole situation. Not only did you take away 2 months worth of games from us due to the strike, but now we have to use one of those weeks to promote a competitor for free? Are you actually kidding me? However, this had nothing to do with Pinchback or broadcasting whatsoever. Pinchback's hands were tied. He directed broadcasts. He couldn't dictate what was on the field or not. That was up to the stadium itself. With that, Pinchback gave O'Neill the number of the Superdome so that O'Neill could voice his frustrations there. However, as you can probably expect, especially based on the game you've been watching all along, nothing happened. What are you going to do about it? Seriously, what can you possibly do about it? We have to get the field ready for the Sugar Bowl. We can't just repaint everything for this game and then repaint it again for a variety of reasons. And seeing as this game was announced in April and was not impacted by the strike whatsoever, you should have seen this as a possible problem. If it mattered to you that much, you should have complained then. You're straight out of luck. And as O'Neill said on Pinchback, and then the number for the Superdome, resigned to defeat, Pinchback pulled a Pontius Pilate on us. He washed his hands of the whole thing. It's a good thing it's our backup game today. Only 6% of the country will see it, unless Dallas-Philadelphia is a blowout. Then we'll have to switch. This is like if a network got upset about a multi-purpose stadium being in baseball season and having a baseball diamond on the field, because it might indicate to fans that the team's season is not over, and they might think to watch their Monday Night Baseball game on national TV instead of the all-new episode debuting of Two Broke Girls. Like, you realize how backwards the logic is here, right? And yet, that's exactly what CBS was going through at the end of the 1982 season with regards to the Superdome and the paint on the field. Because in the eyes of CBS, this broadcast between Washington and New Orleans at the Superdome was going to be anything but super. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.